Perfect. Okay, so this first speech is about Transnistria, the ghost state. And I must admit that I didn't actually know what I was going to talk about today. And my first idea for a speech was actually an idea that I had because I have a Christmas jumper, which is called All I Want for Christmas is EU. It's a play on the famous line from the Maria Carey song, All I Want for Christmas is You. And I have this Christmas jumper called All I Want for Christmas is EU. And originally I was going to do this speech about the EU and basically how much I love the EU. But I realized after talking to my family that I'd probably be preaching to the already converted, and that you probably didn't want to hear another speech about an English person desperately trying to tell the rest of the world that Brexit wasn't in their name. So you're probably bored of those kinds of speeches. So I decided to do it on something a little bit more original. And I would like to talk to you about Transnistria. Transnistria is a country that actually doesn't exist. It has a flag, it has an anthem, it has an army, it has a capital and a president, but it doesn't exist, at least on any maps. It is not recognized by the UN or the EU, and it is not recognized by any of the member states of those two organizations. So to all intents and purposes, it is a ghost state. The capital of this country is Tiraspol. And if you go to this place, it feels like nothing has changed since the era of the Soviet Union. In fact, it is a place which seems to be stuck in time. In front of the presidential palace, you have a massive, colossal statue of Lenin. But this country is actually more than just a ghost state. It is actually of strategic importance to Russia, one of the greatest powers in the world. It is actually essential for the Russia of Vladimir Putin. And it is essential for Putin's relationship, or rather lack of relationship, with NATO and the EU. So in this speech, I'm going to try and explain why this country is more than just a ghost state. Officially, it is an autonomous region inside of Moldova, which is between Ukraine and Romania. Its official title is the Transnistria Autonomous Territorial Unit with Special Legal Status. Moldova is a country which has 3.5 million people. It measures 33,851 kilometers squared, and the capital is Chisinau. There is another autonomous region inside of Moldova, which is called Gagauzia. But in 1992, it was actually Transnistria which proclaimed itself independent. Transnistria is an area between the border with Ukraine and the Dniester River. There are around 555,347 inhabitants, and 1/3 of the people there are actually of immigrant background. They're immigrant workers. What's really interesting about this place is that actually the vast majority of people who live there speak Russian and not Romanian. Romanian is, of course, the official language of Moldova. So 63.2% of people speak Russian and 33.9% speak Romanian. As I said, the country seems to be stuck back in time. It seems to be stuck in the time of the Soviet Union, which makes it a very uniquely interesting place. In the country, you can see Soviet slogans. You can see the hammer and sickle symbol, the symbol of communism. And to all intents and purposes, it is a very pro-Russian place. Its stance on almost everything is very pro-Russian. It was born out of Russia's expansion towards the Black Sea 3 centuries ago. And if that's okay with you, I just want to look back at history, look back at the history of Transnistria. So at the end of the 18th century, Russia had already waged 2 wars against the Ottoman Empire, and the Russia of Catherine II integrated the region of Moldova, the future region of Transnistria, into Russia. So Transnistria and the area around it, which is now modern-day Moldova, became part of Russia in 1792. Then in 1812, Russia started to occupy the eastern part of Moldova, which is a region called Bessarabia. In 1924, the Soviet Union created the Autonomous Republic of Moldova, and it actually integrated it into the Republic of Ukraine. It was a Soviet Republic of Ukraine at the time. Basically, what Russia wanted to do was form this Moldovan nation, which would be different from Romania. Essentially, Russia wanted to reconquer Bessarabia, this region in eastern Moldova, which at the time was part of Romania. They wanted to integrate it back into Russia. Then, in the 20th century, there was a pact between the USSR and Nazi Germany. Over that time, Bessarabia was actually annexed by Stalin in 1940. Then, on the 2nd of August in 1940, the new Socialist Republic of Moldova was created. During the war in 1941, Romania, which was actually allied with Germany, fought against the Red Army, and Germany ended up crossing the area of Transnistria, and it claimed Transnistria for its own. So it was in the hands of Germany at that time. Then in 1944, the USSR took it over once again. Stalin wanted to make this area more Soviet-like. He wanted to Sovietize it, and Russian became the official language in that area. At the time, Transnistria was actually the economic center of Moldova. Transnistria was a place where all the textiles were made. It was also the center for heavy industry. It was also very important from an energy perspective as well. However, the rest of Moldova remained very agricultural. It really depended on subsistence agriculture at the time. Then, as we know, the USSR collapsed, and Transnistria was a place that remained very pro-Russian even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. At the time, Transnistria actually only represented about 18% of the population of Moldova, but it actually represented a quarter of Moldova's GDP because of the heavy industry and the factories that were placed there. So after the fall of the Soviet Empire in 1990, the question of identity in Moldova and Transnistria really re-emerged. The question of identity was very important at the time. And several different communities emerged. Some people in Moldova wanted to be part of Romania. There was this sort of awakening of a Romanian facet of Moldovan identity and nationality. Many people wanted to be part of Romania, and many wanted to break off ties completely with Russia and Ukraine. However, in Transnistria, most people spoke Russian, and they didn't want to be part of Romania at all. So they actually proclaimed themselves as autonomous in 1990. On the 27th of August in 1991, Moldova then proclaimed itself as independent. So Moldova became an independent state, and it was Transnistria which proclaimed itself not as independent but as autonomous in 1990. Romanian was the official language of Moldova at the time, not Russian, but the Transnistrians were not happy about this at all. So as a consequence, Transnistria declared itself as independent, not just autonomous, in 1991. They actually declared themselves to be the Moldovan Republic of Dniester. Now, Dniester is the river which runs through Transnistria. In 1992, the Moldovan army tried to conquer the left bank of Transnistria. The Russian army supported the Transnistrian separatists, and the attempts of the Moldovan army were crushed. It unfortunately led to the deaths of 501,000 soldiers. The situation didn't really evolve after that. The Russians supported Transnistria. They wanted to create a sort of Soviet-like sphere of influence, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I now want to look at two different perspectives, the military perspective and the economic perspective. From the military perspective, Transnistria is very important to Putin's Russia. Beforehand, the 14th Army of Russia was actually placed in Transnistria. And a few years ago, it is estimated that there were 45,000 tons of military equipment stationed in Transnistria by Russia. However, in the eyes of the international community, Transnistria is basically suffering from illegal occupation on the part of Russia. That's the perception of the international community. At the moment, we are talking about roughly 1,000 soldiers, Russian soldiers, which are stationed in Transnistria, and there are around 20,000 tons of military equipment stationed in the capital, Tiraspol. Economically speaking, Transnistria is very important for Russia as well. In fact, Transnistria actually receives 20 million euros of annual aid from Russia. That actually represents 20% of Transnistria's budget. Russia is also responsible for paying all of the pensions in Transnistria. It's also responsible for the gas, which is sent to Transnistria. And Russia is also largely responsible for the industrial production in the region. Another aspect which is very interesting is arms sales. Arms sales are prolific in this region. In fact, it is estimated that Transnistria is one of the main sources of arms sales in Europe. This is largely due to the arsenals which were inherited from the Soviet period. But why is there so much support for Russia in Transnistria? We've already seen the history of it. We've already seen that traditionally this area speaks Russian, and there are many Russophones in this region. But it is also strategically allied with Russia. Russia sees Transnistria as very important because Transnistria allows the Russian forces to pursue a policy of containment with regards to NATO. Although Transnistria doesn't border the Black Sea, it is geographically very close to the Black Sea. And Russia views the Black Sea as its main naval military space, if you will. So Russia is very keen to protect the Black Sea. And having Transnistria as an ally very close to the Black Sea is strategically very important for Putin's Russia. In addition to this, in 2016, Moldova announced that it was going to open up a liaison bureau with NATO in Chisinau. It announced that it would continue this policy and that the bureau would be finished by 2017. Now, this, of course, really angered Putin. So this was a spanner in the works, if you like, in his policy of trying to contain the influence of NATO. Then Igor Dodon, who was pro-Russian, was elected as president to Moldova. So at the moment, there are question marks actually as to whether Moldova really will be able to get closer to NATO, seeing as they now have a very pro-Russian president. Another reason why Transnistria is so important to Russia and why there is so much support for Transnistria in Russia is that Russia wants to really contain the sphere of influence of the European Union in Moldova. Moldova has quite a pro-European stance. In fact, Moldova actually joined the Eastern Partnership, which was put in place by Brussels in 2009. The idea behind this program is to create cooperation between the EU and former Soviet republics. However, only Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine signed this and other association agreements with the EU. So the EU has not been able to really progress much with its policy of trying to get alongside the former Soviet republics. It is worth mentioning also that Belarus and Armenia joined a Russian economic initiative which was launched in 2015. This is called the Eurasian Economic Union. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are also part of this initiative. So altogether you have Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Belarus, Armenia, and Russia, as well as a few other states. Russia has been trying to contain the sphere of influence of Brussels and of NATO, because Russia is very wary of NATO and the European Union impinging on their traditional sphere of influence. As a result, Transnistria is of essential strategic importance for Russia in this aim of containing the influence of these two big organizations. These two organizations are perceived by Putin as a threat, essentially, to Russia's own objectives. There were other separatist states, though, which are also very important to Russia. We could talk about Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan, for example, or South Ossetia in Georgia, which proclaimed its independence in 2008. We could also talk about Crimea or Donbass in Ukraine. These are all areas which are part of Putin's attempt to encircle Ukraine and prevent Ukraine from having any national aims of its own, and secondly, to contain the influence of NATO and the EU. Interestingly, Moldova is actually one of the poorest countries in Europe, unfortunately. In 2016, however, it did sign a free trade agreement with the EU, which would give it more access to the single market. This actually extended to Transnistria as well. Interestingly, Transnistria exports more to the European market than it does to the Russian market. So you would think that Transnistria would have a more pro-EU stance. We don't know actually what Russia will let Transnistria do in the future. We don't know how far Transnistria and indeed Moldova will be able to go with their cooperation with the EU, because they have the spectre of Russia watching over them. But in conclusion, Transnistria is this ghost state. But in spite of this, it is actually more than that. It is strategically very important. It has allowed Putin to encircle Ukraine since the crisis in that country, and it has allowed Russia to maintain its dominance in the region. I'm sorry for being so long with this speech, but thank you very much for listening.